Okay, well, welcome to the A-Push Weary. We believe that we have the shot of adrenaline that you are looking for. Tonight is the third in a 9-segment series by the Bill of Rights Institute to focus on content that you need to review. Tonight, we will focus on the comparing the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, discussing debates between the Federalists and Antifederalists regarding ratification, and compare the competing views of Jefferson and Hamilton that led to the first two-party system. My name is Sean Redmond. I am a high school U.S. history and civics teacher in Southern California at Bolsa Grande High School in Garden Grove, and I am proudly representing the Bill of Rights Institute tonight by monitoring the chat and gathering your burning questions to present to our content expert. That expert and star of the show is the A-Push whisperer himself, Tom Richey. Tom is a Louisiana native. He teaches history and government classes in South Carolina. He has been teaching AP U.S. history since 2008, and since 2012, he has published AP U.S. history-related content on his YouTube channel and website. I'm quite certain that if you've been with us the past two segments, you've become a fan like I am. So let us know the state from which you're reviewing in the chat. Don't be shy about big questions. We'll try to answer them. Also, we have many links in the video notes for you to explore, so check them out, because providing that information and informative material is the mission of the Bill of Rights Institute. So with all that being said, let's get to studying and hand it over to Tom.
All right, Sean, as always, thank you very much for the introduction, and we will go ahead and get into it. Now, yesterday we focused on the American Revolution. I think we've got some, very important content in Unit 3, because we're going all the way from the French and Indian War starting in 1754 to the election of Jefferson in 1800. So in yesterday's session, we focused on, the American Revolution, and then going from there, we are going to go into now the revolution is over and what happens from there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start off. Now, again, y'all go ahead and ask any questions that y'all have when we're coming from, as far as specific content that you want us to emphasize. Okay, but what I'm going to be doing, until we have some specific questions, at least, I'll be going through some things, looking at the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, just taking a quick look at the Philadelphia Convention and at ratification, and then also going into some of the controversies in the 1790s, the first two-party system, Jefferson and Hamilton. Now, also, let's go ahead and take a quick look at some of the resources here. Okay, so you want to make sure the Bill of Rights Institute has several resources here that you can go into the video description, and we can see here that here is Tom's, Tom's website. There should be a link to a Google document that I've got here. Maybe not. Okay, so I will just put that in the chat for for right now. Okay, so that's something I'm not sure that I see that. Remember to follow BRI students on Instagram. Okay, so with that, let me go ahead and and link this thing here that says Session 3 notes. Okay, so those of you who are here right now live in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and share this sheet, and this will likely be added to the archive later on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and link the Google Doc. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make sure that that is there. And of course, there are a lot of great resources available from the Bill of Rights Institute that directly go into some of these things here. Okay, so as far as that goes, you've even got some videos of the Bill of Rights Institute's homework help series. So there are some good lectures there. All right, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take a quick look, starting off at the Articles of Confederation. Now, you're going to see me like skip slides and stuff like that. I'm really going to be looking at the brass tacks, because we're reviewing here, not necessarily teaching this for the first time. So the Articles of Confederation, these formed America's first constitution. And so with that, I think that this is one of my favorite visual sources, partly because it's one of the most misunderstood visual sources, because a lot of people, they can tell you that Ben Franklin made it. Okay, so a lot of students will say, oh, that's that thing Ben Franklin did, isn't it? Yes. But then they'll say during the American Revolution. And no, this was not during the American Revolution. This was during the French and Indian War. And this is when Benjamin Franklin was trying to promote the Albany Plan of Union. Now, remember that the Albany Plan of Union is one of those things that was, that was discussed and it was not adopted. Okay, the Albany Plan of Union was not adopted by the colonies because they didn't want to work together. And so Benjamin Franklin puts this cartoon out during the French and Indian War: join or die. Now, the Articles of Confederation, joined us up for for some limited things, but not for, not very closely. Okay, so as far as this goes, what we want to focus on, and this is going to take us really in a lot of ways, I think through the Civil War and even to today, we definitely can see, while, definitely during the coronavirus pandemic, we've definitely seen states enact different policies, require people from other states to quarantine and things like this. So remember that, that's one thing that we've learned over the past year is federalism definitely is not dead. This idea that there are a lot of decisions that impact our day-to-day lives that are still made at the state level. And so here, the United States, one of our national mottos is e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And so when we look at the Articles of Confederation, very weak in relation to the Constitution, which is why the Constitution eventually replaced it. But note here that the Treaty of Paris, okay, which ended the French, not the French, too many wars here, right? Wrong Treaty of Paris, 1763 versus 1783. Now, the 1783 treaty was a treaty that basically recognized the United States and named each one of them, okay, recognizing them as free, sovereign, and independent states. So that's the starting point. And one thing we want to know about our government is that our government is one that divides sovereignty between the states and the federal government, okay? There are some things that are, and you'll talk about this more, a lot of you will take AP government next year, where y'all will go into, where these, these different powers, reside, that the states have certain reserved powers. And so we see here that the Articles of Confederation makes it very clear. It's kind of similar to the 10th Amendment, okay? When we think about the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, the 10th Amendment employs slightly weaker, but very similar language, where it says right here, now just for clarification, Article 1 said, we're going to call this the United States of America. So Article 2, the first thing of any substance, makes clear that each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power and jurisdiction and right which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. So one of the things that I think is very important is understanding the concept of federalism as it is different from the Federalist Party. Okay, so first of all, federalism just means a division of sovereign authority between the states and the federal government, whereas the Federalist Party was the political party that was created by Alexander Hamilton. Now, also, let's remember the original Federalist, what we call like the Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist, that was specific to the Constitution. So note that James Madison, one of the writers of the Federalist Papers, ended up becoming a Jeffersonian or Democratic Republican, depending on how you like to refer to Jefferson's party. So remember, federalism, two levels of government, each with its own sphere of sovereignty, some of it overlapping. Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist, temporary political alliances around the Constitution. And then you have the first party system of the Federalist Party, and then the Republican Party, depending on who you're talking to, the original one called either the Jeffersonian Republican Party or the Democratic Republican Party. And so we note here that according to the Articles, state governments basically delegated foreign relations to the federal government. Now, when you delegate, you're actually showing that you're in charge. For example, I can't delegate something to my principal. My principal can delegate something to me, but I can't delegate something to my principal, okay? So the states, the assumption here is that the states have all the power to start off, okay? And that they are delegating certain specific powers to the federal government, okay? And so that's what we're seeing here. And so going from there, when I think about the Articles of Confederation, I think about, imagine a military alliance, okay, that basically you've got these sovereign states that are cooperating for a common foreign policy, okay? So everything that is, everything that is within the states control, but everything having to do with the outside, that is delegated to the central government. And so with that, I always note this firm league of friendship in the Articles versus a more perfect union, in the Constitution. So note here in the Articles, the states are represented equally. When you have a military alliance between sovereign states, states will be represented equally. It was very difficult to legislate. Now, this is a kicker, okay? So 13 out of 13 to amend, that you've got to have every state has to agree to amend the Constitution. Okay, so that's something that is very important to note there, that it makes it almost impossible, which James Madison wrote in the Federalist Papers. On one hand, the Constitution should not be easy to amend, but on the other hand, it should not be impossible to amend. And so that is a very, very, important thing there, showing why the Articles had to be replaced rather than amended, because it was just going to be impossible to get everyone to agree. Also, forget what I just said. No executive branch that's independent of the legislature, and no judiciary. Okay, so there's only Congress, and Congress had basically an executive committee. It was more of like a parliamentary kind of system. And so with that, let me go into differentiating the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. Okay, and that I have in the Google document that I shared with y'all earlier. Okay, so when we're looking at this, I've got a chart here that that I've got that some of y'all have accessed, it looks like, comparing the Articles and the Constitution. Now, then we've got a bit that I'm going to talk about with Jefferson and Hamilton. And also I've got a YouTube video where I lecture on Jefferson and Hamilton. And some of y'all might find helpful this period 3 or unit 3, quote unquote, cheat sheet. Now, this is not encouraging anyone to cheat on their exams. This was developed for the 2020 exam, where students were able to use open book, open notes, etc. Okay, so cheat sheet, notice I've got that in quotes. There is nothing there that is encouraging anyone to cheat on an exam or anything like that. So this was designed for a specific purpose that was at the time sanctioned by the College Board. So just to make that clear, that was specific to the 2020 exam and was not advocating anything that was not allowed. And so with that, let me run in here and let's see what I've got here. I'm going to stop sharing for a second and go and check the chat. I'm going to be checking once in a while to see that just to see what we can do as far as making sure that everybody's questions are being answered. So again, if you've got any specific questions, feel free to send them my way. And so with that, let's go ahead and go to, let's see, the Articles versus the Constitution. Okay. And so as far as that goes, just making this comparison of the Articles and the Constitution, and I've got the graphic organizer in the Google document. So you already have access to this graphic organizer that I'm going to be showing you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that up here. And when we are comparing, okay, the Articles in the Constitution, and this would be a great LEQ or DBQ, okay? Like I have actually written a DBQ that says evaluate the extent to which the Constitution represented political change in the United States. Like the question being, was the Constitution a radical departure from the Articles, or was the Constitution more of a tweak of the Articles to give the federal government some necessary powers? Okay, so with that, first of all, we're going to note here that the Articles place sovereignty very, very squarely in the hands of the states, except where they've specifically given it up. And the Constitution creates more of a shared and balanced sovereignty. Now, later on, amendments added during the Reconstruction era and the Progressive era have definitely tilted things a lot more toward the federal government. But at the same time, at the writing of the original Constitution, it created something of a balance of power here. Now, when we're comparing, we need to make sure that we are looking at similarities as well as differences. So when we're looking at similarities between the Articles and the Constitution, my favorite similarity is that there's really nothing, there was no power that the federal government had in the Articles that was taken away by the Constitution. And so note here that when the Articles delegate foreign relations to the central government and the Constitution does the same thing, foreign policy really does not change at all, except for the federal government gets control of trade. We'll talk about that in a second. But as far as sending and receiving ambassadors, maintaining an army and navy, declaring war, making peace treaties, those were all federal responsibilities under the Articles. So if you're looking for a similarity between the Articles and the Constitution, I would look at foreign relations and also the system of federalism. So remember that the Constitution maintains the system of federalism set up by the Articles, just makes it a little bit different. Now, as far as taxation, okay, the Articles only give the states the power to collect taxes. Now, under the Articles, the federal government can just they can beg the states for money and say, hey, states, we need this, but they could not collect it. And so the Constitution corrects this defect, because really you can't have a government that can't collect taxes, okay? Because the operative principle of government is force. Like, this government can force you to pay taxes. I just paid my taxes a couple weeks ago, didn't like it, but I did it. And so because the thing is, the federal government has the power to throw me in jail if I don't pay my taxes. And that kind of has to be the case, because if we didn't have to pay taxes, then we probably wouldn't pay them. And so with that, commerce and trade, we'll see where the states control their own commerce. Whereas this is given partly to the federal government. Now, note here that the Commerce Clause gives the federal government control over interstate commerce, okay, interstate commerce, whereas the states will control their internal commerce, okay? And that's why when you go into a store, like, you're paying sales tax. You're not paying sales tax to the federal government. You're paying sales tax to the state or the local government. So with that, representation, one vote per state, whereas the Constitution sets up two distinct houses, okay? So sets up the House, which is proportional, where the larger states have more to say there, and then the Senate, which considers the federal form. The House is more national, the Senate, where you have two each, all right? And then so to legislate, again, 2/3 of the states versus a majority of the Senate and the House, plus the president's assent, his signature, or in some cases, just not signing it and letting it become law. So then to amend the Constitution, on one hand, unanimous. On the other hand, 3/4 of the states, typically put out there by 2/3 of Congress, 2/3 of each House of Congress to propose an amendment. Now, there's also a provision there for the states to call a convention. That has never happened, because last time that happened, people met at Philadelphia to amend the Articles, and we got the Constitution. Okay, so we can see why Americans see it as a little bit sus to have a convention that, oh, let's have the states get together and amend the Constitution. Okay, last time we did that. Now, I personally think that the amending the Constitution like a convention of states, I think that our Constitution is so entrenched now that even if there were a convention of states, which only has the power to suggest amendments, I don't think that that convention of states would create a brand new Constitution. I just don't see that happening. But then again, we did see that happen the other time. So with that, this is, the Articles versus the Constitution. And so with that, let me note here that, okay, and just to make sure, hopefully, we've got, so if there's anybody that can just help us make sure that the chat is working. Okay, so just let us know at least that the chat is working. Say hey, let us know where you're from. We just want to make sure the chat is working. We had a good many questions the first night, and it's been a little bit quiet this evening. So those of you who are watching, just let us know, give us and remember, thank you for those of you who have given the video a like. And so just, and remember to subscribe to the Bill of Rights Institute if you have not already. So with that, if somebody can just in the chat, just say like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm from such and such state. That would help us. Okay, thank you so much, Miss Phenomenal. All right, and Kaylin, thank you so much, and Laya. Okay, there they are. Remember, you can ask questions. Okay, anything is fair game. Okay, anything's fair game. Hey Molly, and let's go again. Okay, yes, it looks like the chat is working. We've got a very vibrant chat, and I kind of feel like I skipped over the Philadelphia Convention. Let me just do just a quick couple of things here. Okay, so let me just note here that the Philadelphia Convention, otherwise known as the Constitutional Convention, but yeah, y'all y'all get that chat going. Give Sean something to do here, okay? Because Sean's actual you saw him give that great introduction, and as much as I think Sean has earned his keep just by that, he's also here to help moderate and answer questions in the chat. So with that, we want to note Sheas Rebellion as a causal factor, okay? Sheas Rebellion as a causal factor for the calling of the Constitutional Convention. Sheas Rebellion was a rebellion in Massachusetts. Massachusetts farmers, after the American Revolution, they're responding to a bad economy, and the state is foreclosing on their farms. And so they figured, you know what? We've got a way that we can stop these foreclosures. We'll go storm the courthouse. Okay, these were guys who, a lot of them had been Revolutionary War veterans. They had been Minutemen and that sort of thing. They knew how to get together, and they knew how to keep the courthouse from opening. And so Sheas Rebellion lasted for months. The Massachusetts government was not able to put it down within their state. And then there was no really consideration. There was no system for, helping to restore order in a state, that the federal government, could restore order in a state. So that's something Sheas Rebellion is making a lot of elites uncomfortable. Now, of course, Jefferson, ever the rationalist, he's like, you know what? I mean, we've been independent like 10 or 11 years, and we've only had one rebellion in one state. That's basically a rebellion in each state every 150 years, whatever, which really, Jefferson, felt like he had a point, but other people like Madison and Washington did not agree with him, okay? There were also trade barriers between the states. That's part of the reason for the Commerce Clause. So they met at Annapolis. They decided, you know what, we want to meet again some other time, okay? And so they go to Philadelphia. Now, remember, the stated purpose of the Philadelphia Convention is to amend the Articles. And James Madison's like, hey, I showed up with like a whole new constitution, writing this thing from scratch. And when I'm thinking about the Constitutional Convention, you think about Dr. Seuss's book, like One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. I think I've got it on my shelf somewhere. So let's see here. Yes, actually, I've got it right here. It's a longer book than I, thought it would be. A few years ago, I'm like, hey, I should read One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish when we go over the Constitutional Convention. It ends up, there's more to it. It's, just a little more than I remember, but a great book. Okay. But given this, if you just need some, some leisure reading while you're preparing for this exam or afterwards, but, you've really got 4 types of states. Okay. Which, every state is either a large state or a small state, or a few of them in the middle. Okay. You've got large states and small states. And then you've got slave states and free states. What we want to understand is that the Constitution was a product of compromise, okay? That there were several compromises that went into this, and nobody really got exactly what they wanted, okay? So when you're looking at this, all kinds of statistics here, this is looking more like something from AP Government. You don't have to memorize this chart or anything like that, but noting that, the population at that time of the North northern states and the southern states was roughly equal. Okay, so when you look north of the Mason-Dixon line versus south, the population of the South is actually a tad bit higher. Now, in order, though, for it to be a tad bit higher, you have, 642,000 slaves that were counted in the 1790 census. And so that's 94% of the slave population at that time was south of the Mason-Dixon line. And so with that, without counting slaves for representation, the South was at a sizable disadvantage, would have about 1.2 million free inhabitants versus 1.7 million inhabitants in the North. And so going from there, they had some debates here, the Virginia plan versus the New Jersey plan, where James Madison said 2-house legislature based on population. New Jersey, the small state plan, which you don't need to know Patterson's name, Madison would be useful. But he said, hey, unicameral legislature, 1 vote per state. Didn't we come here to, I don't know, amend the articles? Okay, so the small states are like, no. And so then, how do we, it's like when you go on a date, how do you share the dessert? Do you share it equally, or, does the bigger person get more of the dessert? How do you do it, And of course, Hamilton's like, why do we even need the states at all? Okay, remember Hamilton, like privately at the Constitutional Convention where nobody was taking notes. Hamilton's like, why do we even need the states? Okay, why don't we take away all of their sovereignty and make them basically administrative districts for a national government? And so with that, he wanted to take all that away, but the convention did not debate Hamilton's plan. Instead, they listened to Roger Sherman from Connecticut, who was from like a middling-sized state, didn't really have a horse in the large state, small state race. And so he was saying, like, look, let's have a lower house, a House of Representatives based on population, directly elected by the voters, and then a Senate, an upper house with 2 votes per state appointed by state legislators. So they also, doing this, they have the small states and the large states are, they are split, they are compromising there. And also they're compromising between aristocracy and democracy. One thing we want to note is kind of a precursor to Jacksonian democracy, which we can talk about tomorrow, that the framers, they wanted a democratic element in the Constitution, but they were by no means trying to create a democracy per se. Okay, so we want to make sure that we understand that. And so with this, the next question is, between the slave and the free state, should slaves be counted for purposes of representation in the lower house of Congress? And this seems ridiculous, to count someone as both a person and and as property. But what's happening here is a compromise is necessary, because there are some of the southern states whose delegates were threatening to walk out of the convention, that they would not, agree to any kind of governing document, given that the House of Representatives is based on population, that they were not going to enter into an agreement that would have the North and the South on unequal terms in terms of population. And so with that, you have a very spirited debate there where they say, okay, for representation in Congress, slaves will be counted as 3/5 of a person. So on one hand, they've got the 3/5 compromise, and for the North, after 20 years, Congress has the power to regulate, which means, what they're going to do is they're going to outlaw the international slave trade. Okay, so Congress is going to outlaw the international slave trade. So that's the biggest controversy there that you see at the Constitutional Convention. The controversies between the slave states and the free states, and the large states and the small states. And as I noted, we're going to see added like the President of the United States. There will be a federal judiciary and all of that. And so let's run over to the chat and see what we've got here. And
hey, Tom,
yeah.
Alyssa asked, is there any particular founders at the delegation that they need to know about for sure.
Okay, well, with that, this sounds like a great time to go ahead and start talking about a little bit about ratification. Okay, so when we're getting into ratification, what we want to note there about the ratification of the Constitution is that you have the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. Okay, and the Federalist, these are people who are saying that we should ratify the Constitution. Now, the Federalist Papers were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Okay, they were going over the pseudonym Publius. Okay, so James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, and they are arguing for the ratification of the Constitution. Now, Anti-Federalists, they were concerned about a number of things, but their biggest concerns were that the Constitution was going to destroy federalism. Now, remember, we have to distinguish federalism, the principle, from a Federalist or the Federalist Party. So when we talk about federalism, this is the division of powers between the federal government and state governments that, Anti-Federalists, writing under names such as Brutus, the guy that stabbed Caesar, okay, they are writing that this Constitution is going to actually create a national government, a unitary government that is going to that is just basically going to rule from a national capital. And then they also believe that this is going to take power away from the people. And in the Federalist Papers, like basically Madison, Hamilton, and Jay are arguing that no, by calling it the Federalists, this is really what's very interesting because, the Anti-Federalists are also Federalists. When you think about in the literal sense, where we're thinking about somebody who believes in the division of powers between the federal government and state governments. Okay, so with that, when they call it the Federalists, this is a rhetorical term that we're saying that the Constitution does not destroy federalism, okay, that basically the rights of the states are safe, the rights of the people are safe. So on one hand, you've got the Federalists saying ratify the Constitution, the Anti-Federalists saying don't ratify it. And so about 6 or 7 states, like very quickly, like if you think about dominoes, that very quickly, a lot of states, especially states like, Delaware and Connecticut and Maryland, states that had like commercial interest, and not as much agriculture, that some of these states very quickly, they ratify the Constitution. But New York and Virginia were some of the last holdouts. So it got to where, we're going to get these 9 states that are necessary, but without New York and Virginia, come on, like it's not going to happen. And so this is where, when we think about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, although we have a lot of compromises at the Constitutional Convention, you have one last compromise, okay? One last compromise, which is going to be the compromise that is going to ratify the Constitution. And that was that James Madison, said that, what? I will help to write a Bill of Rights. I will introduce amendments during the first meeting of Congress that will protect the rights of the people and the rights of the states. And so that's where we get the first 10 amendments, freedom of speech, religion, freedom of the press, the right to bear arms, the, protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, making sure that this federal government, and also through the 10th Amendment, which says that, hey, that language from the Articles that said, hey, if the Constitution did not give a power to the federal government, it stays with the states or with the people. Okay. Now, of course, that's going to be the next debate after the Constitution is ratified, with the Bill of Rights as a compromise. So remember, the Federalists didn't win per se because they didn't get exactly what they wanted. What the Federalists wanted was for this Constitution to be ratified without a Bill of Rights, but it's ratified with one. And good thing, because, we're kind of going to need that Bill of Rights not too long after only 10 years after the government starts operating, that you see within the first decade, the Alien and Sedition Acts are passed, which are, a flagrant violation of the First Amendment. And so with that, the Bill of Rights is passed and the Constitution is ratified. But then the next battle is, what does this all mean? And this is where, some historians talk about a James Madison problem, okay? Because, which I think, when you look at Madison, I mean, he's got a pretty coherent viewpoint throughout this whole thing, but, basically on one hand, you had Madison. When you're reading, Federalist 10, Federalist 51, it can almost put you to sleep because Madison is spending a lot of time explaining the Constitution. Whereas Hamilton, it's very easy to read Hamilton because Hamilton's basically, he's selling the Constitution to you. Like the judiciary, nah, man, that's going to be the least dangerous branch. You don't have to worry about that. They're going to do nothing. All right. No, you don't have to worry about that at all. And then we look at U.S. history and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that was, nice one, Hamilton. And Hamilton is really just trying to sell it because he sees this is a way to increase the power of the central government. And so, Madison and Hamilton, they split after the Constitution is ratified because Madison, sees he's not quite as hard ideological states' rights as Jefferson, but Madison sees the Constitution, like Jefferson, as fundamentally a contract between the states, whereas Hamilton sees the Constitution as the best thing that he's got in order to increase the power of the central government and to make the United States a great nation. Now, this is something that, I think we've got kind of an ongoing thing here that on one hand, the United States is a great nation because the United States has a strong economy. The United States has a strong military. The United States, the power of the United States is respected in the world. Hamilton would have loved that. That's Hamilton's view of a great nation, that we are respected in the world. We're economically prosperous. We have a strong military. Now, to Jefferson, what makes a great nation? How free are its people? Okay, that's what Jefferson is asking. When we think about the fundamental conflict between Jefferson and Hamilton, are these two equally legitimate views about what a great nation is? Okay, so that's something that I think is, very much worth noting here in terms of thinking about those things. It's like, okay, how prosperous are you? How strong are you? But also, how free are you? Okay, and so this is really, I think, when we think about those big questions, the issue at stake between Jefferson and Hamilton. And I have got this graphic organizer in the Google Doc that I've made available to y'all, and I'm waiting to be able to actually just make this on the screen. Okay, so the first two-party system, Jefferson versus Hamilton. Now, this is 1791 to 1816. This is going to go through the War of 1812, and so it's going to end with the era of good feelings. Okay, so this is what we're going to see here, that Hamilton was the leader of the Federalist Party. Okay, the leader of the Federalist Party, whereas Jefferson, now he called it at the time the Republican Party, but this is something I prefer, the term that historians have typically used, the Jeffersonian Republican Party. I find it to be a bit more, more accurate. But at the same time, I think that our current, the current incarnation of the APUSH course tends to use the term Democratic Republican Party, which is more often used by political scientists. Okay, and that's something. So understand whether we're talking about the Jeffersonian Republican Party or the Democratic Republican Party, we're talking about Jefferson's party, distinct from the Republican Party of the 1850s, which of course is interesting enough. They're actually willfully calling it this because they wanted to invoke Jefferson. Jefferson thinking in terms of how free are you? Okay, and the Republican Party in the 1850s, it's often the the Confederacy that is waving the states' rights banner, but at the same time, the founders of the Republican Party, they believed in a state's right to resist the institution of slavery and to not have excessive federal regulation of slavery. So that's something they were definitely giving a nod to Jefferson when they named the Republican Party in the 1850s, the Republican Party that, was the beginning of the Republican Party we have in this country today. And so with this, when we're looking at the first two-party system, I think that this is one of the most important things that we are going to consider in this class, like just period. Okay. And so with that, the leaders here, Hamilton and John Adams. Okay. Whereas Jefferson, now remember, don't call the Jeffersonians anti-federalists, because now while most anti-federalists would have joined Jefferson's party, we don't want to confound those terms, because James Madison had been a federalist when it came to ratification. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to take this specific period and discuss it in depth, because there's just a lot of terminology that if you're loose on it, it's going to cause a lot of problems. Okay, so remember federalism. How do they interpret federalism? Hamilton and Adams believed in a strong central government, whereas Jefferson and Madison are promoting states' rights. Now, as far as fears, okay, like the Federalists feared anarchy and mob rule, okay, those are their fears, whereas the Jeffersonians feared tyranny. Okay, they believe that, you know, our biggest problem is government getting too much power and tyrannizing the people, whereas Hamilton and Adams are not so concerned about that. They're thinking, you know what, the problem is when we don't have enough government. Okay, and so so with that, you know, as far as seeing this, how do they see the Constitution? Now, the other thing is, look at these two columns as a system. Okay, the worst thing that you can do is look at each of these boxes as representing its own thing. Okay, because what we want to think about is, how do all these viewpoints run together? So when we think about this, the Constitution, okay, now Hamilton, loose construction. Now, I never use Comic Sans except when I'm talking about loose construction, because loose construction is kind of the, you know, the Comic Sans of constitutional interpretation. It's just like, well, you know, the Constitution, it's just kind of a general guideline. I mean, you don't have to color in the lines. You know, it's like basically you think about like a, you know, a kindergartner, like, look, I've colored a picture for you. And you say, oh, that's really good. You know, Hamilton's like the Constitution, living document. It's just, it's just, you know, it's just a general kind of thing here. Okay, it's not supposed to be that strict. Jefferson's like, whoa, 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 whoa. The Constitution is the Constitution. Like, you know, think about this. Like, if my car payment, you know, it's like when I bought a car, I took out a 5-year loan on the vehicle, and I'm supposed to pay such and such amount of money at such and such interest rate. And what if the bank's like, you know, we were going to give you 5 years, but now that we think about it, we're just going to give you 3. And actually, we're going to raise the interest rate a little bit, because, you know, what really matters is that you paid for the car, right? And Jefferson's like, no, the Constitution is a contract. Like, it actually has to mean something. And if you play around with it too much, it's going to lose its meaning. But then again, of course, Jefferson is a states' rights guy. So a strict construction of the Constitution reins in federal power, preventing tyranny and defending the rights of the states. Whereas the loose construction of the Constitution, it makes sure that there's a strong central government that can keep things from going to anarchy and mob rule. Okay, such as you know, Hamilton would see, like when we look at the farmers who were Jeffersons. I mean, this was like the nation was 95% rural at the time. So the Federalists, their writing was on the wall. Their clock was ticking, like from the second the Constitution is ratified, because Jefferson is organizing rural agrarian interest. And so one thing we could see here is that, you know, for example, the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay, so when we're looking at the Whiskey Rebellion, okay, so this is something I've got some, you know, some APUSH notes here on the Whiskey Rebellion. I'm going to go ahead and add that. You can just search for Whiskey Rebellion APUSH or Whiskey Rebellion Tom Richey, and I've got some very detailed notes on the Whiskey Rebellion. And then I also have a link to the lecture that I've got here. So with that, I'll go ahead and add that here. Okay, so we've got the Whiskey Rebellion lecture notes. and YouTube. Okay, so that's going to be something that could be a, that could be something to help you out. Okay, so just something that you want to keep in mind there, that for Hamilton, it's like when the Whiskey Rebellion happened, this rebellion against Hamilton's tax on whiskey. Hamilton saw this as something we've got to put this down. I mean, this is mob rule, and we've got to get like 13,000 men to put down this rebellion of like 400 Western Pennsylvania farmers. And so the thing is, this becomes a big deal here. And the Whiskey Rebellion, on one hand, it showed that this new stronger central government was sufficient to put down a rebellion. Now, on the other hand, it showed farmers that if you want to have any shot at freedom, you're going to have to support Jefferson's party. I mean, so, while the Whiskey Rebellion was a short-term victory for Hamilton, his party is never going to, occupy any of the elected, it's never going to control an elected branch of government after 1800. Now, the judiciary, that's another story. So Hamilton believed, now government involvement in the economy, Hamilton, he wants a stronger central government, but mostly he wants the government involved in economic development. Okay, he's not like a big government guy in terms of wanting to establish a welfare state or anything like that. I mean, Hamilton couldn't care less about people that don't have money, right? But at the same time, he believed in promoting manufacturing. Okay, and one of the things there was the national bank. Okay, and this is an example of strict versus loose construction. Delegated or enumerated powers versus implied powers. Okay, so when Jefferson looks at the Constitution, he's like, okay, the government has this power, this power, this power, this power. And then Hamilton looks at the Constitution, he's like, okay, the government has this power, this power, this power, this power, and others are implied. Now, the example that I give is if I'm in my classroom and there's someone at the door, and I ask one of my students, will you please go and get the door? Now, I'm implying when I say, like, I don't have to tell this student, could you please get up out of your seat and walk to the door and open it? Okay, so when I say can you get the door, please? That is something that I am implying. Okay, I am implying that I'm asking you to get up out of your seat. I don't want you to drag your desk over there. So the thing is Hamilton makes the argument to George Washington that the Constitution, does allow a national bank, even though it doesn't mention it. And using the necessary and proper clause, which Jefferson, when he sees the necessary and proper clause, Jefferson focuses on necessary. Okay, if it's not necessary, it doesn't say, Jefferson said, helpful or convenient. It says, necessary and proper. But Washington, he goes along with Hamilton, even though Washington was a nonpartisan president or considered himself that way. He had a habit of siding with Hamilton on almost everything, even in Jefferson's, foreign policy province. So a protective tariff, Hamilton wanted, a tariff. Jefferson, not so much. Hamilton didn't get a very high tariff, but assuming debts. And remember that Hamilton is more of an Anglophile. He's going for England for foreign policy, whereas Jefferson more on France, the Francophiles. Now, again, this is available in the Google document that I've got linked here. I've got this graphic organizer in there. So let's go ahead and run in there. I think we've we've definitely got we've got some questions. Let's get to some questions.
So Tom, somebody was wondering, is the Jeffersonian Republican Party mostly supported by Southern states? And then if that's so, is the opposite true as far as sectional type?
Okay, so there's a little bit of fluidity here, but there is a trend so it's not like cut and dry. Now, one thing, I was actually talking to somebody at random about Jefferson and Madison's botanizing tour. I've actually got a video on that like almost nobody watches, but Jefferson and Madison went up to New York and they decided, now, strictly speaking, they're on a vacation, but it was a very legitimate vacation. But they went up to New York in order to, and while they were there, they met a guy named Aaron Burr. Okay, so 1796 presidential election. Okay, so let's just go ahead and look at the 1796 presidential election. Now, there's definitely a trend. the farther south and the farther west you go, the more support for Jefferson's party. Okay, so this is 1796. Now, if we go to 1800, though, what we're going to see here is that New York has turned to the Jeffersonians. Okay, so and then we also see that Pennsylvania, North Carolina, they're sending some Federalist electors. Remember, the states get to decide if they do winner take all or if they distribute their electors. And at this time, some states were still distributing their electors. And so we definitely see to the south and to the west, there's going to be more support. And as you add states in the west, overwhelmingly supporting Jefferson. And so with that, it's very important to note here that now, of course, Jefferson's first term, as we'll get into tomorrow, Jefferson gets a very resounding victory. And then, now 1808, we still see a little bit of a comeback. But yes, definitely. And when you think about the Louisiana Purchase, this is something that is resisted by the Federalists largely because it's going to add new states to the South and the West. Okay, so while there's not a hard and fast rule, we do want to note that. And one of the things Washington warns about in his farewell address, okay, so when we're looking at this, Washington's farewell address is something that, he is now his foreign policy. I've got a video on, if you just put in Washington's foreign policy or George Washington's foreign policy, you'll see here where Washington wants to be neutral, okay, in the wars of the French Revolution. Whereas Jefferson wasn't wanting to send American troops or anything like that to fight for the French, but Jefferson felt like as a sister republic, the United States should at least give the French support in spirit. Jefferson believed that the United States would be isolated if Europe did not, if European powers did not adopt Republican forms of government. And so Washington took Hamilton's advice and look, we need to stay out of that. Hamilton was not a fan of the French Revolution. And so the Jay Treaty, that was a very controversial treaty that gave most favored nation trading status to Britain. So as far as that goes, George Washington said in his farewell address, his two biggest takeaways: avoid permanent alliances and foreign influence that comes with that, and then avoid political parties. Now, there is another warning. These are the two most cited, but there is also another warning against sectionalism. Okay, Washington sees sectionalism becoming a thing, and he says this is going to be very, very bad for the country. But it's certainly something that we can see in the first two-party system. And so with this, the political controversies only get worse when John Adams comes into the presidency. And it looks like the Bill of Rights Institute has a resource, here, for the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. If you go into here, we can see, let's see. I tell you, I love Federalist 39. That's one of my favorites, where Madison goes into, Federalist 39 goes into, this is how the government is federal and this is how the government is national. I'm glad they've got something on Federalist 39. So with that, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, we've got something here, some primary sources. Okay, so what had happened when we look at the context of the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, what we see is that the Congress, controlled by the Federalists, they passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. Okay, now one thing to note here is the Alien and Sedition Acts are actually like four distinct acts, which come from, they range from constitutional and a good idea, like, for example, like it empowers the president to remove people from the country that are foreigners that have a risk, okay, that they're risky. So for example, if there were some, like, this is actually a power the president still has today. If there were someone in this country that is a foreign national and there is some pretty reliable indication that this person has had some dealings with ISIS or some other group that's hostile to the interest of the United States, we would want the president to make sure that that person is no longer in our country. But then, because the federal government controls citizenship and naturalization, that's a delegated power. It's enumerated in the Constitution. They extend the period by which someone coming into the country as an immigrant would become a U.S. citizen. Now, is this constitutional? Strictly speaking, yes, but it's also politically motivated. And of course, that's something we see over and over again in US history and even today, that when parties see themselves as not being likely to get votes from immigrants, they tend to, want to tighten immigration. Whereas if a party sees themselves getting votes from immigrants, they want to encourage immigration. Now, in this case, the Federalist Party, they knew that most of the immigrants were voting with Jefferson's party. And so they extended the period by which somebody would become a citizen of the United States and be able to vote. Now, that is something that's strictly speaking constitutional, but in practice, it was super political, okay, and an abuse of power. Now, then you go to the Sedition Act, okay, where basically it banned newspapers from criticizing the government, which is, of course, the whole idea of the First Amendment is the right to criticize the government. And so this is something that is not only, a bad idea and politically motivated, but patently unconstitutional. And so with this, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which you could see here, this primary source analysis available at the Bill of Rights Institute, they go into the bill, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. So this is a beautiful primary source, by the way. So we see here that Virginia, Madison's Virginia resolution versus Jefferson's Kentucky resolution. Now, one thing that both Jefferson and Madison are promoting what we would call compact theory, okay? Compact theory, this is a theory of the Constitution that says that the Constitution is a contract between the states, okay? So they agree on that, and basically the Constitution's a contract between the states. So just like I said, when it comes to like your rental lease or your mortgage or, your car note, that you've made a contract. And if the bank were to tell me that we are increasing your car payment, I would just hang up, okay? I shouldn't have to sue the bank. I shouldn't have to go to court and, sue the bank in order to keep my current payment. I would just hang up the phone. And so Jefferson is going a little farther than Madison. While they both embrace compact theory, Jefferson, it makes the first public declaration that basically, and actually he's doing this anonymously, okay, which ironically, he's in the same position that Calhoun will be during the nullification crisis. Like both the South Carolina Exposition and the Kentucky resolutions, these were both written anonymously by a sitting vice president in order to, protest the policies of the central government. So the thing is that Jefferson, although they're both coming from the point of view of compact theory, one thing we're going to note here, okay, now that's not in this one. Let's see. So void. Okay, that's actually, it should come up there. Okay, so, this doesn't come up in the excerpt, but, okay. So let me just pull up, where Jefferson, let's see, Kentucky resolutions. Okay, so when we look at the Kentucky resolutions, let's see here that we've got, when we look, let's see, full text. It's really amusing because Jefferson, he was the classic Aries. Like when he picked up the pen, he got very, very, you couldn't even hear the guy give a speech because he was so soft spoken. But then he was, he was very, when he got the pen, it's like he's screaming at you. So basically, well, wait. Okay, I don't know what's happening there. That I'm looking for something. All right, so nullification, okay, is the rightful remedy. Okay, actually, I was looking for something that said void, but yeah, we've got nullification. Okay, so nullification by those sovereignties of unauthorized acts. Okay, so basically, that's what Jefferson's saying. Now, note here, when we search for the word nullification, we're not going to find it in Madison's Virginia resolution. Now, again, let's see, because there are a couple of drafts that Jefferson makes. So I think this is the one that was actually adopted. Jefferson's draft of the Kentucky resolutions, it said something like, that continued infractions against the Constitution will result in revolution and blood. Like Jefferson would just, I mean, he was very, very adamant. Madison more like, look, hey, we're the states, we had a contract, and we're just giving the federal government a friendly reminder. Now, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, they kind of become, they kind of get swept under the rug when Jefferson is elected president. And that's the thing that I always call like states' rights between the 1790s and the Civil War. It's almost like the whack-a-mole, where it's like, it just comes up and then it's like, it just goes back down. And so it's like states' rights. It's like something happens. Oh, there's states' rights. And then they just, and it's just not really settled before gosh, now it's getting blurry. Okay. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all for coming in tonight. And hopefully you found this helpful. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this to my friend Sean, as he's always got the best outros.
Well, thank you so much. I tell you what, Tom, no matter how many times I hear this information, I get something new, clarity from you. So it's fantastic. I know everybody else is too. Please continue to join us on our series. I hope this is helping you. I don't know how it can't with our expert. The Bill of Rights Institute is devoted to teaching U.S. history and preparing you for the APUSH exam. There are so many resources available. Tom talked a lot about them today. They are on the video notes, so check them out. Tell your friends to show up tomorrow. Tell your relatives. Tell your parents. They need a refresher course, I'm sure. You teach them. You tell them to come. And join us tomorrow when we get into more about the beginning of the Constitution and our country. So that sounds good. Anything else to add, Tom?
I think we're good. Of course, remember, we're going to be back Wednesday and Thursday before taking a little break on Friday and Saturday. So 6:30 p.m. Eastern, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, great. We'll see you all then. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.